said in my last video that The House in the Cerulean Sea is a great example of how to write child characters. This book feels like a great example on how to write parent characters. Because it's a trope, right? How is the teenage protagonist supposed to get anything done if their parents are breathing down their necks with boring stuff like homework or staying alive? So the parents either need to be bad parents who don't care about that stuff or not be in the picture at all. Which is why we have so many orphan protagonists living with people who care about them less or who are completely clueless on how to take care of kids. But Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune doesn't fall into that trope. Arthur and Linus are great parents who love their kids and take good care of them, and their family still has a fun, compelling adventure. Let's talk about that. Somewhere Beyond the Sea starts with Arthur returning to Marsyas Island as an adult after having bought the house where he grew up. And now he's determined to turn what was a house of horrors for him into a beautiful, loving home for more children. Once he's on the island, he's reunited with Zoe, and the two of them get to work fixing up the house and putting everything in place to take in children. And the prologue ends with the first child on the ferry on their way to the island. And it annoyed me to no end that the book never said exactly which child was the first to arrive. It's not really a flaw, it's just something I wish I knew, which, if anything, is a compliment that I was so immersed in this world that I obsessed on these little details.
I noticed details.
After the prologue, the book officially starts with a birthday party for Linus that's doubling as a going-away party for him and Arthur, since Arthur's been summoned to talk at a hearing about his experiences growing up under the thumb of Dicamy. And right away, it's so fun being thrown into the chaos of their lives. We're given the chance to see the kids and how they interact without Arthur and Linus around, as well as how Arthur and Linus interact as a couple. And it's all so fun to get that glimpse into a somewhat normal day for the family and all the chaos that follows them around.
It's chaos, sir.
Then the book immediately gets sad, because in the next chapter, Arthur and Linus leave for the city, and Arthur has to leave his children for the first time. It's so sad, and the book does an amazing job at making us feel how Arthur's heart is being ripped out. But Arthur still has to go, and we follow Arthur and Linus back to the city, where right away they make a detour back to Hermes Way and Linus's old house. We don't get to see his old neighbor, Mrs. Clapper, but we do get to see more magic of this world, since Linus has some seeds from Fee and Talia that he promised he'd plant in his old garden, and it was really satisfying getting to read how their magic interacts and makes the flowers grow. That's something that was really fun about this world. We get acquainted with a lot more magical creatures, and we get to see not only their magical abilities, but the book expands on what the children can do with their magic. Then after their detour, Arthur and Linus head back to their hotel, where the tension of the book is established, when they discover a hearing device in their room. And we learn later that the person responsible for the bug is Janine Router, a powerful political figure who hates magical creatures, and who's currently in charge of Dicamy and Dicama. But that's all in the next set of chapters. These chapters pick up at Bandycross, the government building where Arthur's hearing is happening. When Arthur and Linus arrive at the building, they're right away hit with tension from the protests and counter-protests going on for and against rights for magical creatures. And the tension builds once they're inside the building, and they meet a woman who's an ally and who explains to them that they have friends in high places and basically what to expect from the hearing. And all that tension gets to the best of Arthur at the hearing, when after talking for hours and getting questioned, and when we're given plenty of reasons to hate Janine Router, Arthur's pushed to his limit and lets the Phoenix out. And it's such a frustrating scene because Arthur's playing right into their hand, showing that he's the monster they want him to be, but it's also really sweet seeing how Linus is able to calm him down. And after Arthur reins in the Phoenix, the hearing ends. Arthur confronts Janine about the bug in their hotel room, and they leave.
This is about the headphones?
They head back to a different hotel where they check in with the children, which is a nice bit of chaos after all the tension from the hearing. Then the next day, they go to meet David, who was set up in the epilogue of the last book. He's a Yeti kid in need of a permanent home, which is what Linus and Arthur have to offer him. The two of them go to the house, which is a safe haven for magical adults, where David has been staying. Linus and Arthur meet Jason and Bea, who run the house, and they're introduced to David, where he puts on a one-person play, basically about those old black and white detective films that have been parodied to death and back. And this is another thing I really love about the book. They don't shy away from the kids swearing or talking about adult themes that are just a little out of their grasp of understanding, but it's still stuff that they're picking up on because that happens. Anyone who's spent time around kids has also cursed in front of a kid. And David's also a really fun character. It's fun watching a new kid interact with Arthur and the rest of the family, and watching David push back, giving them a hard time, but still being a kid and having fun and experiencing new things. Then the night after they meet David, they head back to their hotel, hoping to get a call from Jason and Bea that David wants to go home with him. But he doesn't, and that leads to my favorite scene in the book, where Linus proposes. It's such a cutesy and cheesy scene, and I've gone back and reread it like 3 or 4 times, because it's just so sweet, and Linus and Arthur are just such a fun couple. I don't even think I'm much of a romantic, it's just such a cute scene.
So cute.
Anyway, after the proposal, Arthur and Linus go back to get David and take him home. And Arthur and David both have fun riding the bus and train back home with David in disguise, since he's unregistered. Then they arrive and are happily reunited with the rest of the children, as well as Zoe and Helen, who I should mention are also dating now. And this leads to another really sweet scene where they show David his new room, which is the cellar that's been refurbished to be a proper cold bedroom for a Yeti. And it's all really sad and sweet reading David get a bedroom of his own for the first time and talk about his parents and what he remembers of them. And that's another thing I love about the book. It doesn't talk about the orphans' biological parents too much, but it does bring them up and acknowledge their absence in a really sensitive and heart-wrenching way. But I can't dwell on that or I'll cry. So moving on, back on the island, Arthur and Linus have to prepare for an upcoming inspection that Janine ordered. And in the meantime, they try to distract the kids with adventures.
Life goes on.
Their first adventure is Chauncey's Saturday adventure, where he takes them out into the ocean to sail on his yacht. And this is the part that really made Arthur and Linus feel like good fantasy parents, because near the end of their adventure, they realize they have no way to get home, and they give the kids room to come up with a plan. And for the most part, it feels like they have control over the situation, as much as they can when they're stranded on a boat in the middle of the ocean, while still giving the kids room to push their limits and think on their own. And in spite of giving the kids that freedom, they end up home unbroken.
Oh, I'm hurt! I am very much...
And as fun as that was to watch, it also broke immersion for me watching Sal lead the other kids and watching how wise he is and how he makes a lot of really good decisions. In the last book, Sal was a lot quieter and lumped in with the other kids, which was also a criticism. He was acting the same way as a 6-year-old, even though he was 14. I feel like this book was better at having the kids act different to better fit with different ways kids at different ages would act. But with Sal, who's 15 in this book, it feels like the pendulum swung the other way. He feels very adult and not quite like a teenager who makes mistakes and has big feelings and reactions, which they're supposed to. That's how their brains work. But I also wonder if this is an old woman shouting at Cloud, misremembering my own teenage years. I don't know, and no one who knew me in high school is here right now. So let's move on. The next adventure they have is a sleepover in the gazebo the night before the caseworker arrives. It's just a really sweet moment where we get to see their family dynamic again before tension really starts rising again. These are the chapters with the caseworker disrupting everything. The caseworker is a woman named Miss Marblemont, who's all buttoned up and proper like Linus was when he arrived. But worse. When we're first introduced to Miss Marblemont, the book describes her as having a bun, and I thought there would be that trope where someone removes her bun to signify how she's freeing herself and accepting her new life. But that doesn't happen. And we learn later that Miss Marblemont has a lot riding on this visit going a certain way, because she was sent here as a sort of probation to see if she can be a caseworker or if she needs to be sent back to the mailroom. Which says everything we need to know about Miss Marblemont, which is that she's an idiot. Because I've worked in mailrooms for years, and that's a good gig. You don't. Alright, I removed the 2-hour rant of me going on about how my day job isn't awful. Back to the book. Miss Marblemont arrives and she's introduced to the children, and part of this introduction leads back to my criticism about Sal, where he's given too many opportunities to be wise and constantly make good choices. Because originally Arthur and Linus planned to hide David since, again, he's undocumented, so Miss Marblemont can't know about him. But Sal and the other kids decide they wouldn't do that, and instead they come up with a convoluted story that David is an adult who's just short. And that was actually very funny, because I feel like they could have just said they were babysitting David. Like, people do that. They watch kids of friends or family members for extended periods of time. But no, they say he's an adult, and Miss Marblemont doesn't buy it for a moment, but she has no proof that he's actually a child. And I will say, it was funny watching everyone lie to her. They lie a lot in this book, and it's really fun watching everyone BS Miss Marblemont and really any outsider. It's a good way to make the audience feel like we're part of the in-group of this story.
Oh, I get it. I get jokes.
Anyway, so Miss Marblemont arrives and starts causing issues. The kids react to her pretty much the same as they did with Linus, but she's not Linus, and she claims not to feel fear. So it was fun watching the kids try to mess with her and failing. But it was also frustrating watching her mess with everyone. In some ways, she screws up because she's new to her role and doesn't know what she's doing. So she does stupid stuff like wears jewelry around a dragon or tries to tell Talia to shave her beard. But other stuff she does maliciously. The first Saturday that she's there, they go to the mainland and to the record store where David starts playing around with J-Bone. And when Miss Marblemont thinks she sees a Yeti messing with a human, she grabs and bruises him, which leads to another moment of Arthur almost losing his cool, and the rest of the family having to rush over to stop Arthur and get Miss Marblemont away from David. And it was such a sad and frustrating scene because I get where Arthur's coming from. I wish she could have burned her. I wish someone had punched her for putting her hands on a little kid.
Punch him in the face.
But no, they have to let Miss Marblemont keep working, so they go back to the island. And this is another bit that broke immersion for me. In the first book, Merle the Ferryman was written as this nasty, money-grubbing man who was pretty unpleasant to everyone he met. But in this book, he's softened, and he looks out for Arthur and the kids, even at the cost of money. And I wish we'd seen more instances of Merle being mean. Sometimes it's fun to read about characters being nasty. He didn't have to be mean to the kids or Arthur, but just nasty in general. And it also broke immersion for me how much he seemed to respect Arthur and listen to him. I can believe he was softened by getting to know the kids, but the being respectful felt very out of character to me. But at least Miss Marblemont got to see Merle being nasty, even if we didn't. And she returns to the island and continues her tirade.
Maybe my path is a warpath.
And it all comes together when Arthur finds out she has a computer and she's been FaceTiming and spying with Janine Router to be instructed on how to shut down the children's home and get the kids taken away. All because Janine wants Lucy and all the power that Antichrist holds. Learning this gives Arthur what I kept thinking of as just a slight emotional breakdown. He barely manages to hold on for the rest of the day until that night when he snaps at Linus and flies out the window, literally. And that's another thing I liked about Linus and Arthur's relationship. They're cute together, and part of that cuteness comes from them bickering, disagreeing, and snapping at each other, and getting to watch them come back together after a fight. It feels really realistic and gives their romance really great depth that's hard to find since a lot of people don't know what to do with a romance once it's established. If you want to avoid the drama of a will they, won't they, but still want drama in a romance, this book is a great example on how to do it in a charming and healthy way.
So cute.
Anyway, Arthur flies out the window in his phoenix form and has a literal explosion where he lets out all the pent-up rage and tension he's been holding on to. Then afterwards, Linus finds him, and Arthur tells Linus about Janine's spying, and they make a new plan on how to mess with Miss Marblemaw properly. They can't scare her, but they can run her ragged, exacerbate her allergies, and just generally make the rest of her stay miserable. And alright, because I criticize Sal a lot, I will mention a moment that I really liked. This book, like the first, does an amazing job showing the cat and making us care for Calliope. And one of the ways they do that is by showing us her bond with Sal. She loves him. Linus has been fully relegated to her spare human because she has Sal, and when he's in his Pomeranian form, she sees him as her baby. And it's cute and sweet and satisfying watching Miss Marblemaw get scratched up when she tries to mess with Sal when Calliope's around. And as much as they try to mess with Miss Marblemaw and get through their last week of her inspection, they don't quite make it. One day Lucy makes mud golems, and when Miss Marblemaw loses her mind over them, they decide to officially banish her from the island. We get to see some of Zoe's magic, and it's just a really cool and satisfying watching how Zoe banishes Miss Marblemaw from her island. And we're also given some great foreshadowing when the Mud People call Zoe Her Majesty, and that foreshadowing comes together in the next set of chapters. The ending of the book was so cheesy and so fun. After they banish Miss Marblemaw from the island, they decide to decompress a few days later with a trip to town. And while they're in town, they're accosted by Janine and her goons, who want to take the children from Arthur and Linus. And this is where a plan Zoe's been working on that's been hinted at, but not explicitly talked about throughout the book, comes together. As it turns out, the Mud People were right, because Zoe's the Queen of Marsyas. We learn that Marsyas used to be a peninsula, but when people came and killed off the sprites who were living there, Zoe's grandmother created the island in a last-ditch attempt to protect her people, who after the massacre was just Zoe. And now Zoe's deciding to reclaim her title and reform the peninsula so she can banish Janine and her goons from Marsyas completely and make a safe haven for more magical creatures. And it's this really intense family is the most important thing of all a climax that was so fun and so satisfying, watching the bad guys get put in their place.
Punch him in the face.
And the epilogue picks up somehow even cheesier because it's Arthur and Linus's wedding, and weddings are cheesy. It's a really cute chapter, and it also shows off a bunch of magical creatures who have moved to Marsyas. And we also learned that Doreen, who was just a secretary for Dicemy in the last book, is a satyr who's now in charge of Dicemy and Dicema. Since Janine is so spectacularly messed up in Marsyas, she was removed from her position. And overall, it was a really hopeful and happy ending. The only thing I didn't like is that the children still aren't officially adopted. I realize that's because these kinds of things take time, and if there's another book in the series, there needs to be loose ends. But it left me worrying about the kids, and I feel like I worried about these fictional children enough. But that's what's so great about Somewhere Beyond the Sea. It makes you care about the characters. And overall, it was a great sequel because it did so great at building off of what the first book set up. Sequels are hard. It can be hard wrapping up the last book and not knowing where to start with a new one without backtracking with character growth or retelling the first story. If you want to know how to write a sequel, this is the book to read. So go and read Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune.